Guadalcanal is the principal island in Guadalcanal province of the nation of Solomon Islands in the southwestern Pacific, northeast of Australia. It was discovered by the Spanish expedition of Álvaro de Mendana in 1568. The name comes from Guadalcanal, a village in the province of Seville, in Andalusia, Spain, birthplace of Pedro de Ortega Valencia, a member of Mendana's expedition. During 1942–43 it was the scene of the Guadalcanal campaign, and saw bitter fighting between Japanese and U.S. troops. The Americans were ultimately victorious. At the end of the war, Honiara, on the north coast of Guadalcanal, became the new capital of the British Solomon Islands Protectorate. Guadalcanal is mainly covered in dense tropical rainforest and it has a mountainous interior. History. Western charting. A Spanish expedition from Peru under the command of Álvaro de Mendana de Nera discovered the island in the year 1568. Mendana's subordinate, Pedro de Ortega Valencia, named the island after his hometown Guadalcanal in Andalusia, Spain. The name comes from the Arabic Wadi el Qarnat, which means Valley of the Stalls, or River of Stalls, referring to the refreshment stalls which were set up there during Muslim rule in Andalusia. In the years that followed the discovery, the island was variously referred to as Guadalcana, Guacana, Guadalcana, and Guadalcana, which reflected different pronunciations of its name in Andalusian Spanish. European settlers and missionaries began to arrive in the 18th and 19th centuries, and in the year 1893, the British Solomon Islands Protectorate was proclaimed, which included the island of Guadalcanal. In 1932, the British confirmed the name Guadalcanal in line with the town in Andalusia, Spain. Second World War. In the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Japanese drove the Americans out of the Philippines, the British out of British Malaya, and the Dutch out of the East Indies. The Japanese then began to expand into the western Pacific, occupying many islands in an attempt to build a defensive ring around their conquests and threaten the lines of communication from the United States to Australia and New Zealand. The Japanese reached Guadalcanal in May 1942, when an American reconnaissance mission spotted construction of a Japanese airfield at Lunga Point on the north coast of Guadalcanal. The situation became critical. This new Japanese airfield represented a threat to Australia itself, and so the United States, as a matter of urgency, despite not being adequately prepared, conducted the first amphibious landing of the war. The initial landings of U.S. Marines on 7 August 1942 secured the airfield without too much difficulty, but holding the airfield for the next 6 months was one of the most hotly contested campaigns in the entire war for the control of ground, sea and skies. Guadalcanal became a major turning point in the war as it stopped Japanese expansion. After 6 months of fighting, the Japanese ceased contesting the control of the island. They finally evacuated the island at Cape Esperance on the northwest coast in February 1943. Immediately after landing on the island, the U.S. Navy Seabees began finishing the airfield begun by the Japanese. It was then named Henderson Field after a Marine aviator killed in combat during the Battle of Midway. Aircraft operating from Henderson Field during the campaign were a hodgepodge of Marine, Army, Navy and Allied aircraft that became known as the Cactus Air Force. They defended the airfield and threatened any Japanese ships that ventured into the vicinity during daylight hours. However, at night, Japanese naval forces were able to shell the airfield and deliver troops with supplies, retiring before daylight. The Japanese used fast ships to make these runs, and this became known as the Tokyo Express. So many ships from both sides were sunk in the many engagements in and around the Solomon Island chain that the nearby waters were referred to as Iron Bottom Sound. The Battle of Cape Esperance was fought on the 11th of October 1942 off the northwest coast of Guadalcanal. In the battle, United States Navy ships intercepted and defeated a Japanese formation of ships on their way down the Slot to reinforce and resupply troops on the island, but suffered losses as well. The naval battle of Guadalcanal in November marked the turning point in which Allied naval forces took on the extremely experienced Japanese surface forces at night and forced him to withdraw after sharp action. Some Japanese viewpoints consider these engagements, and the improving Allied surface capability to challenge their surface ships at night, to be just as significant as the Battle of Midway in turning the tide against them. After 6 months of hard combat in and around Guadalcanal and dealing with jungle diseases that took a heavy toll of troops on both sides, Allied forces managed to halt the Japanese advance and dissuade them from contesting the control of the island by finally driving the last of the Japanese troops into the sea on 15 January 1943. American authorities declared Guadalcanal secure on 9 February 1943. 2 U.S. Navy ships have been named for the battle. US Guadalcanal, a World War II escort carrier. US Guadalcanal, an amphibious assault ship. To date, the only Coast Guardsman recipient of the Medal of Honor is Signalman First Class Douglas Albert Monroe, awarded posthumously for his extraordinary heroism on 27 September 1942 at Point Cruz, Guadalcanal. Monroe provided a shielding covering fire, and helped evacuate 500 besieged Marines from a beach at Point Cruz. He was killed during the evacuation. During the Battle for Guadalcanal, the Medal of Honor was also awarded to John Basilone, who later died on Iwo Jima. Post-war years immediately after the Second World War, the capital of the British Solomon Islands Protectorate was moved to Honiara on Guadalcanal from its previous location at Tulungi in the Florida Islands. In 1952, the High Commissioner for the Western Pacific moved from Fiji to Honiara, and the post was combined with that of the Governor of the Solomon Islands. The airfield, which was the cause of the fighting in 1942, and which became well known as Henderson Field, is now the international airport for the Solomon Islands. It sits about 5 miles to the east of Honiara. Civil war in early 1999. Long simmering tensions between the local Gwali people on Guadalcanal and more recent migrants from the neighboring island of Militar erupted into violence. The Guadalcanal Revolutionary Army, later called as a Taboo Freedom Movement, began terrorizing Militans in the rural areas of the island in an effort to force them out of their homes. About 20,000 Militans fled to the capital and others returned to their home island. Gwali residents of Honiara fled. The city became a Militan enclave and the Militar Eagle Force took over government. The Royal Australian Navy and Royal New Zealand Navy deployed vessels to the area to protect the expatriate community resident mostly in Honiara. On her second visit to the capital, HMNZS Takaha served as venue for a series of peace talks culminating in the signing of the Townsville Peace Accord. In 2003, the Pacific Forum negotiated the intervention of RAMSI, or Operation Help Friend, involving Australia, New Zealand, and other Pacific Island nations. Fauna. There is a native marsupial known as the phalanger or the grey cuscus. The only other mammals are bats and rodents. There are many species of colourful parrots as well as estuarine crocodiles. In recent times, these crocodiles have been found only on the weather coast in the south of the island, but during the Second World War, they were found along the north coast in the vicinity of the airstrip where the fighting was taking place, as evidenced by names such as Alligator Creek. Venomous snakes are rare and are not considered to be a serious threat. However, there is a kind of centipede which gives a particularly nasty bite. These centipedes were well known to the American Marines during the Second World War as the stinging insects. Bibliography. Frank, Richard B. Guadalcanal. The Definitive Account of the Landmark Battle. Penguin Books, 1990. Haddon, Robert Lee. 2007. The Geology of Guadalcanal. A selected bibliography of the geology, natural history, and the history of Guadalcanal, by Robert Lee Haddon, Alexandria, Virginia. Topographic Engineering Center. Abstract. This bibliography on the geographical, water and geological information of Guadalcanal was begun to fill a request for current information needed for the forensics recovery of the bodies of the U.S. Marines of the Lt. Col. Frank B. Goetger Reconnaissance Patrol that was ambushed in August 1942. Part 1 of this report is a bibliography of the geology, geography and natural history of the island. Part 2 is a bibliography on the history of the island, including accounts of the Battle of Guadalcanal. This bibliography brings together selected citations from a variety of different cartographic, geographical, geological and hydrological resources and a number of specialized library collections. Most of the citations have location information on where these items can be located and either used on site, or borrowed through interlibrary loan, or where copies of the items can be purchased from the originating source, or through commercial document delivery services. Hakeem, Joy, A History of Us, War, Peace and All That Jazz. New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-509514-6.